She slept in her car for 284 nights. Her daughter Emma curled beside her in the back seat, 5 years old, breath-forming ice crystals on the Honda's windows each December morning. Admiral Whiskers, a threadbare stuffed rabbit with one missing eye, served as the girl's pillow. Sarah Mitchell's mechanic jacket became their shared blanket, never quite thick enough against the Colorado cold. The envelope arrived at the post office on a Tuesday morning in late November. Forwarded 3 times from addresses Sarah no longer lived at, the heavy cream paper felt wrong in her hands. Bills came on thin stock. Collection notices on cheap copy paper. Final warnings on whatever the creditors could afford. This was different. The wax seal bore an embossed ship, and the return address read Maritime Legal Services, Winter Harbor, Maine. Sarah stood in the fluorescent hum of the postal lobby, Emma's small hand gripping her worn jeans, and tore open the seal. The letter inside was typed on thick stationery, formal and distant. Dear Miss Mitchell, we regret to inform you of the passing of your uncle, Captain James Mitchell, on August 14th of this year. As the sole surviving heir named in his will, you are entitled to claim his estate located at 47 Frost Point Road, Winter Harbor, Maine. The property includes one residential maritime structure and accompanying land. Please contact our office within 60 days to arrange transfer of deed. Sincerely, Robert Ashford, Maritime Legal Services. She read it twice, then 3 times. Uncle James. She hadn't seen him since she was 7 years old, hadn't even known he was still alive. He'd been the family ghost story, the man who disappeared to sea and never came back. The brother her mother stopped mentioning after too many Thanksgivings ended in arguments about responsibility and choices and wasted potential. Emma tugged her sleeve. The paper says something good, Mama? Sarah folded the letter carefully, hands shaking slightly. It says we might have a place to live, baby. The words felt dangerous to speak aloud, like naming a wish might curse it. They'd been homeless for 11 months now, ever since the landlord sold their apartment building and the new owners doubled the rent overnight. Sarah had tried everything, shelters that were full, friends whose couches ran out of welcome, the motel that ate through her paycheck from the auto shop faster than she could earn it. When the shop closed down, even that thread snapped. Now they lived in the battered 2004 Honda Civic, parking in different lots each night to avoid trouble. She used the last of her cell phone minutes to call the number. A receptionist with a crisp New England accent confirmed everything. Yes, the property was real. Yes, it was legally hers, no liens, no outstanding debts. The estate had been held in trust, taxes paid from a small account her uncle had maintained. She could take possession immediately. What kind of house is it? There was a pause on the line. It's listed as a residential maritime structure. I haven't seen it personally, but Mr. Ashford mentioned it's quite unique. You should probably see it yourself, Miss Mitchell. Unique meant problematic. Sarah had learned that code, but it was hers, and it was shelter, and Emma deserved walls and heat and a bed that didn't smell like old fast food. She scraped together money for gas by selling her toolbox. The good one, the Craftsman, set her father had given her when she was 16, back when he still believed she'd make something of herself. The pawn shop gave her $200. It wasn't enough, but it was something. They left Colorado 3 days later, everything they owned fitting in 2 duffel bags and Emma's backpack. The drive took 6 days. Sarah stretched every dollar, sleeping in rest stops, letting Emma believe they were on the world's longest road trip. They sang songs from the radio, counted license plates, made up stories about the people and passing cars. The businessman was actually a secret agent. The family in the minivan was fleeing from pirates. The truck driver was hauling treasure instead of vegetables. Emma pressed her face to the window somewhere in Nebraska and watched America scroll past like a movie she was seeing for the first time. Mama, what if the house doesn't like us? Sarah glanced at her daughter in the rearview mirror. Houses don't have feelings, baby. Admiral Whiskers says some do. The old ones remember. Sarah smiled despite her exhaustion. Well, if this one doesn't like us, we'll just have to convince it. We're worth keeping. They crossed into Maine on a gray morning when the sky looked like wet concrete. The landscape changed mile by mile, dense forest replacing plains, rocky coastline emerging where flat land had been. The air smelled different here, salt and pine, and something ancient that Sarah couldn't name. She rolled down the window despite the cold and let it fill her lungs. Winter Harbor wasn't on most maps. It was the kind of coastal town that existed in the gaps between tourist destinations, too small for chain restaurants, too weathered for summer people. The main street held a post office, a general store with peeling paint, a marine supply shop, and a frozen marina where fishing boats bobbed like exhausted dancers. Sarah stopped at the store for directions. The woman behind the counter was 60s-something, gray hair pulled back tight, and she studied Sarah with the particular suspicion small towns reserved for strangers. "You looking for 47 Frost Point?" "Yes, ma'am. How did you—" "You're Theodore's—" The woman caught herself. "James's niece." Sarah nodded. "I am. Didn't know he had family. Thought you all abandoned him years ago." The judgment in those words landed like a slap. Sarah's jaw tightened. "I was a child when I last saw him. I didn't abandon anyone." The woman's expression didn't soften. "Helen Crawford," she said, not offering a hand. "That property's been empty 4 months now. Some say it should be condemned. Road's rough getting out there. You got four-wheel drive?" Sarah thought of her Civic's bald tires and questionable suspension. "We'll manage," Helen continued as if Sarah hadn't spoken. "It's the old ship house. Folks around here don't go out that way much anymore, especially not in winter." "Why not? Your uncle was private, kept to himself. Some say he was touched in the head, living in that thing. Others say he was protecting something. Either way, place has a reputation." Emma tugged Sarah's hand. "Mama, I have to pee. Bathroom's in back." While Emma went, Sarah studied a bulletin board covered in local notices. Boat repairs, fresh lobster, estate sales. Tucked in the corner, nearly hidden, a yellowed newspaper clipping caught her eye. The headline read, "Local captain claims discovery of privateer wreck, authenticity disputed." The article was from 1998, nearly 3 decades old. It featured a grainy photo of a man standing beside what looked like salvaged ship timber. Sarah leaned closer. She recognized him. Older, weathered, but unmistakably Uncle James. The article described his claim that he'd located the wreck of the Winter's Curse, a privateer ship that supposedly sank off the Maine coast in 1743. Maritime historians remain skeptical, the article concluded. Captain Mitchell refused to disclose the wreck's coordinates, citing safety concerns. Local authorities found no evidence to support his claims. Sarah's stomach tightened. Her uncle hadn't just been eccentric, he'd been obsessed. The bell above the door chimed. Sarah looked up as a man entered, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. He was well-dressed for a Maine fishing town. Expensive winter coat, leather gloves, the kind of casual wealth that didn't need to announce itself. 60s maybe, with silver hair and the bearing of someone used to being obeyed. Helen's demeanor changed instantly. "Mr. Kane, your usual coffee?" "Black, Helen." "Thanks." His eyes found Sarah, cataloging her cheap coat and worn jeans in a single sweep. "You must be James Mitchell's niece. Heard you were coming. News travels fast. Small town. Marcus Kane. I own Kane Development, half the properties in Winter Harbor." He extended a hand. Sarah shook it briefly, feeling the softness of palms that had never held tools. "So you're inheriting the eyesore." "The ship house. I haven't seen it yet." Kane turned to Helen, speaking loud enough for the entire store to hear. "Poor girl doesn't know what she's getting. That wreck should have been bulldozed years ago." "I'll decide that for myself," Sarah said. Kane's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Your uncle wasted his life on fairy tales, obsessed with a ship that never existed. The Winter's Curse was a legend, nothing more. No treasure, no historical value. Just rotting wood and a crazy old man's delusions. He was my family that abandoned him, from what I heard. Now you show up when he's dead, hoping for—" "What exactly?" The implication hung in the air like smoke. "Gold digger, opportunist, someone who didn't belong here and never would." "I came because I had nowhere else to go." Sarah's voice was steady, but rage burned underneath. "And whatever that property is, it's mine now," Kane laughed, the sound genuinely amused. "It's worthless. I offered James $50,000 for the land alone, triple what it's worth. He refused out of spite." He paused, letting that number sink in. "I'll make you the same offer. 50,000. Watch, you can leave, start fresh somewhere warm." Take it before winter really hits. That structure won't survive another storm season. Sarah met his eyes. I'll see it first before I decide anything. Kane shrugged, already dismissing her. Your funeral. When you're ready to sell, come find me. But don't wait too long. Desperate people make bad decisions, and you look pretty desperate to me. He took his coffee from Helen and walked out, leaving Sarah standing in the aisle with every eye in the store on her. The other customers looked away, embarrassed for her or by her. Sarah couldn't tell which. Emma emerged from the bathroom. Mama, why are you sad? Sarah forced a smile. I'm not, baby. Let's go see our new home. Helen rang up the groceries Sarah had selected, then added items she hadn't: fresh eggs, milk, cookies. James kept a credit account here. $218 left. It's yours now. Sarah's throat tightened at the unexpected kindness. Thank you. Helen's expression softened slightly. James was odd, but he wasn't cruel. Whatever you find out there, remember he had his reasons. She paused, glancing toward the door Kane had exited through. And don't let Marcus Kane bully you. He's been trying to buy that land for 30 years. Why does he want it so badly? Prime ocean frontage. He'd tear down the ship house, build luxury condos. Your uncle refused at every offer. Said some things matter more than money. Sarah carried the groceries to her car, aware of eyes following her through the store's dusty windows. As she loaded the trunk, she noticed Kane across the street, phone pressed to his ear, watching her. Not dismissive anymore. Calculating. If the property was worthless, why did he want it so badly? The road to Frost Point was exactly as rough as promised. Potholes deep enough to swallow tires, branches scraping both sides of the Civic like skeletal fingers. The pavement gave way to gravel, then to dirt packed hard by decades of use and neglect. Through breaks in the trees, Sarah caught glimpses of the ocean, gray and restless, white caps churning against dark water. Emma had fallen asleep in the back seat, Admiral whiskers tucked under her chin. Sarah was grateful. She didn't want her daughter awake for this first glimpse, didn't want to see disappointment cloud those hopeful eyes if the house turned out to be uninhabitable. The trees opened suddenly into a clearing, and Sarah stopped the car. Before her, perched on a rocky outcropping above a small, crescent-shaped beach, sat the most extraordinary structure she had ever seen. It was a ship, an actual ship, or rather the hull of one, massive and ancient, planted into the ground as if it had sailed straight out of the ocean and beached itself on purpose. The bow pointed toward the water, weathered wood silvered by salt and time. The stern had been built into, expanded with rough lumber and mismatched materials to create what could generously be called a house. Snow had begun to fall, dusting the structure in white, making it look like a ghost ship frozen mid-voyage. Icicles, 4 and 5 feet long, hung from remnants of rigging, still clinging to makeshift masts. Windows had been cut into the hull sides, their glass mostly intact but filmed with grime. A crooked chimney jutted from what must have been the main cabin, smoke stains darkening the wood around it. Seabirds had nested in the high places, and moss grew thick where the hull met earth, visible even through the gathering snow. It was rotting. It was impossible. It was hers. Sarah sat very still, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what she was seeing. This wasn't a house. This was madness, given form. This was her uncle's obsession, made real. And suddenly she understood why Marcus Kane wanted it. Not for the structure, that was clearly worthless, but the land, prime oceanfront property, protected cove, worth millions in development. The ship house was just an obstacle to his condominium dreams. Emma stirred in the back seat, rubbed her eyes, and looked out the window. Her mouth fell open. Is that a pirate ship? Sarah almost laughed. It's our house, baby. We get to live in a pirate ship? Looks like it. They got out of the car into wind that hit like a physical blow, cold and sharp with ocean spray. The sound of waves crashing against rocks below filled the air, constant and primordial. Gulls cried overhead, their calls lonely and wild. Sarah approached slowly, Emma's hand in hers, boots crunching through fresh snow. Up close, the structure was even more bizarre. The hull was enormous, easily 80 feet long, the kind of merchant vessel that would have carried cargo across colonial trade routes. The wood was old-growth timber, dense and dark even after centuries of weathering. Someone, her uncle presumably, had spent years converting it. The stern section had been carefully modified with additional rooms built outward, supported by stone foundations and heavy posts. A small covered porch wrapped around what would have been the captain's cabin. Rain barrels collected runoff from the makeshift roof. A generator sat under a tarp near the door. It was insane. It was brilliant. It was falling apart. Sarah tried the door. It opened with a groan that sounded like the ship itself was waking up. Inside was darkness and the smell of old wood, salt, and something musty, aged paper maybe, or ancient fabric. She felt along the wall, found a light switch, flipped it. Nothing. Power was off. They had a flashlight in the car. Sarah retrieved it along with their few bags, and they stepped inside together. The beam of light revealed a space that defied logic. The main room occupied what must have been the ship's gun deck. The ceiling curved to match the hull's interior, exposed ribs arching overhead like the skeleton of some great beast. The floor was original ship planking, worn smooth by centuries of feet. Furniture sat covered in sheets, a table, chairs, a sofa. Bookshelves lined one wall, crammed with volumes on maritime history, navigation, shipwrecks, piracy. Maps covered another wall, some ancient and yellowed, others modern navigational charts marked with notations in faded ink. A kitchen had been installed in what was once cargo space. Mismatched cabinets, a small stove, a sink with a hand pump. The wood stove Sarah had seen from outside occupied the corner, its chimney rising through the curved ceiling. Doorways led to other spaces. Sarah explored cautiously, Emma pressed close to her side. A bedroom with a hammock strung where a bed should be. Another smaller room filled with salvage equipment. Dive tanks, wetsuits, metal detectors, coils of rope. A bathroom with a composting toilet and a shower rigged from a rain collection system. And everywhere, signs of her uncle's obsession. Photographs of shipwrecks tacked to walls, sketches of vessel designs, newspaper clippings about maritime disasters and treasure finds, books with titles like Privateers of the Atlantic and Colonial Maritime Trade Routes. His handwriting and margins, on scraps of paper, on the walls themselves, coordinates, calculations, theories. This wasn't a house. This was a research station, a museum, a shrine to something lost. Sarah found herself in what must have been the captain's cabin, the room at the stern with windows overlooking the ocean. It had been preserved more carefully than the rest. A desk sat before the windows, its surface organized with nautical instruments, a sextant, a compass, dividers, parallel rulers. A logbook lay open, her uncle's final entries visible in the flashlight beam. November 8th, position holding. Winter storm approaching early. Must secure forward section before deep freeze. The cabin remains sealed. Soon. After all these years, soon, the cabin. Sarah looked around but saw no other rooms. What cabin was he referring to? Emma had discovered a telescope mounted by the window. She peered through it, gasping. "Mama, I can see whales, or big fish, or maybe sea monsters." Sarah set down the flashlight and joined her daughter at the window. The view stole her breath. The crescent beach curved below them, protected by rocky outcroppings on either side. Beyond, the Atlantic stretched to the horizon, vast and gray and eternal under the darkening sky. She understood suddenly why her uncle had stayed, why he'd built this mad thing and refused to leave. The isolation, the beauty, the constant conversation with the sea. They spent the next hour exploring by flashlight, taking inventory. The structure was surprisingly sound despite its appearance. The hull was solid, the additions weatherproof enough. The generator started after some coaxing, providing power to lights and a small refrigerator. Water came from rain collection, currently frozen. They'd have to melt snow. Heat would come from the wood stove and a propane heater her uncle had installed. It wasn't comfortable, it wasn't normal, but it was shelter. It was theirs. As sunset painted the sky orange and pink through the western windows, Sarah stood on the small porch and watched the ocean swallow the sun. Emma played on the beach below, collecting shells, talking to Admiral Whiskers about their new pirate fortress. A figure emerged from the path leading to the marina, an older man in a heavy coat and captain's hat, walking with the rolling gait of someone who'd spent their life on boats. He stopped at the edge of the clearing, studying Sarah with open curiosity. "You're James's niece." It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded. "I am. Sarah Mitchell." He approached slowly, hands in pockets. "Harbor master, Frank Morrison. Knew your uncle for near about 40 years. You were friends?" "Wouldn't say friends. James didn't really do friends. But we talked boats, shared coffee sometimes. I respected him, even when he got strange." "Strange how?" Frank looked up at the ship house, his expression difficult to read. "This whole thing started out reasonable enough. He bought the hull in '87, been wrecked on that beach since a storm in '55. Town was going to break it up for scrap. James got it for nothing, said he wanted to study it. He paused, watching Emma on the beach. Then he started living in it. Then he started claiming it was more than just an old merchant hull, said it was the Winter's Curse, the privateer ship everyone thought was legend. Was it?" Frank shrugged. "Maritime Museum sent someone out in '99. They looked at the wood, the construction, the artifacts James had found, said it was consistent with 1740s colonial shipbuilding. Could have been from that era. But proof that required more than wood and nails. What would it require? The ship's bell, the manifest, the cargo." Frank met her eyes. The treasure, the word hung in the air between them, heavy as the gathering snow. "Treasure," Sarah repeated. "That's what privateers did. They raided enemy vessels under government license, took their cargo, shared it with the crown, kept a portion for themselves. The Winter's Curse was rumored to have been carrying gold and silver from a Spanish raid when it went down. Some say 200,000 pounds in colonial currency." He paused, calculating. "That's worth, well, in today's money, hard to say. Tens of millions, maybe more." Sarah's mouth had gone dry. "My uncle believed that." "Your uncle believed the ship was down there somewhere. Spent every spare moment diving, searching, nearly killed himself half a dozen times. Then about 20 years ago, he stopped diving, started working on this structure instead. Said he'd found what he needed." Frank's expression darkened. "But he never showed anyone, never proved it. Just kept living out here, getting older, talking less and less." "Did you believe him?" Frank was quiet for a long moment, watching the waves. "I believed he believed. That's about all I can say." He turned to leave, then stopped. "Word will get around you're here. Folks like Marcus Kane think James found something and hid it. They'll come asking questions. Be careful who you trust." "What about you? Should I trust you?" Frank smiled slightly. "Your uncle did. That ought to count for something." Emma ran up from the beach, pockets bulging with shells. "Mama, can we live here for real?" Sarah looked at the impossible ship house, at the ocean beyond, at her daughter's hopeful face. They had nowhere else to go, no other options, just this strange inheritance and whatever secrets it held. "Yeah, baby, for real." That night they slept in sleeping bags on the floor of the main cabin. The ship creaked and groaned around them, wood settling, wind pushing against ancient timber. The sound of waves was constant, rhythmic, almost like breathing. Sarah lay awake for hours, staring at the curved ceiling overhead, thinking about her uncle's final logbook entry. The cabin remained sealed. Soon. What cabin? Where? Tomorrow she'd start looking. Tomorrow her life would change in ways she couldn't begin to imagine. Morning came with fog so thick Sarah couldn't see the ocean from the windows. It pressed against the glass like something alive, turning the world into cotton and shadow. She woke to Emma already sitting cross-legged on her sleeping bag, whispering to Admiral Whiskers about their pirate fortress and the treasure they'd surely find. "Mama, the ship talks at night. It tells stories about when it sailed on the ocean." Sarah stretched, back aching from the hard floor. "Does it now?" Admiral Whiskers heard it too. He says the ship is lonely. It remembers when it was alive. Something about those words stuck with Sarah as she stood and surveyed their new home in daylight. The main cabin looked different now, less mysterious, more desperate. Water stains darkened the ceiling in places. The windows needed caulking. The floor had gaps between planks wide enough to lose coins through. One section of wall bulged slightly, suggesting water damage or rot beneath. They had work to do, lots of it. But first, supplies. Sarah counted the money she had left, $83 and change. Enough for basics if she was careful. She left Emma playing pirates on the beach while she drove into Winter Harbor, memorizing the route this time, noting landmarks. The lightning-split pine, the boulder shaped like a sleeping bear, the place where the road curved closest to the cliff edge. The general store was busier this morning. A handful of locals clustered near the coffee pot, their conversation stopping abruptly when Sarah walked in. She felt their eyes tracking her as she moved through narrow aisles, selecting carefully. Bread, peanut butter, canned soup, pasta, powdered milk, candles, matches, duct tape, a basic tool set she could barely afford. At the counter, Helen rang her up without comment. But when Sarah pulled out her last bills, Helen paused. James kept a credit account here. Paid in full every month for 37 years. Never missed once. Account still has a balance of $218. Sarah blinked. I can use that? It's your inheritance, isn't it? Helen's expression softened slightly. She bagged the groceries, then added a few items Sarah hadn't selected. Fresh eggs, milk, a package of cookies. For the little one. Thank you. James mentioned once he had a niece in California. Never said more than that. Guess he was a private man about everything. Did he come to town often? Once a week, like clockwork. Wednesdays. Bought supplies, picked up mail, sometimes sat at the diner for lunch. Didn't talk much, but he was always polite, always paid his debts. Helen paused, her eyes flickering toward the other customers who were definitely listening. Last few months, though, he looked tired, worn down, like he was carrying something heavy. Did he ever mention finding anything in his research? Helen's expression shuddered. Not to me, but there were others asking. Treasure hunters, history buffs, even some antique dealers from Boston. He turned them all away, said some things weren't meant to be disturbed. As Sarah loaded groceries into her car, she noticed Helen watching through the window. The older woman pulled out her phone, made a call, eyes still on Sarah. A chill ran down her spine that had nothing to do with the December cold. Back at the ship house, Emma had made a friend. A scruffy orange cat sat on the porch railing, watching her daughter with calculating green eyes. Mama, can we keep him? Please. His name is Barnacle, and he used to live here with Uncle James. The cat did look familiar with the place, sitting proprietarily on the railing like he owned it. When Sarah approached, he didn't run, just blinked slowly and meowed once, demanding. I guess Barnacle can stay, but he's an outside cat. Barnacle, as if understanding, promptly walked through the open door and claimed the sofa as his throne. They spent the afternoon making the ship house livable. Sarah swept away months of dust and cobwebs while Emma organized their meager belongings. They hung curtains salvaged from a box in the storage room, washed windows until the ocean view became clear and bright, aired out musty blankets, arranged furniture into something resembling a normal home. But normal was impossible here. Everywhere Sarah looked, she found reminders this was a ship. Brass fittings on the walls where rigging had once been secured. The curve of the hull creating odd angles in every corner. A hatch in the floor that led to bilge space below, now used for storage. The whole structure shifted slightly with strong wind, creaking and groaning like it was still at sea. Emma loved it. She claimed the small forward cabin as her room, declaring it the treasure keeper's quarters. She arranged her few toys and books on shelves built into the hull's curve, hung drawings on the walls, and convinced Sarah to let her sleep in the hammock their uncle had strung there. Pirates don't sleep in regular beds, and I'm the youngest pirate captain in all the seas. After dinner, pasta cooked on the small stove, eaten at a real table for the first time in 11 months. Sarah returned to exploring while Emma slept. She moved methodically through the ship house, examining everything her uncle had left behind. His life was documented in layers. Photographs spanning decades showed his transformation from young fisherman to middle-aged researcher to elderly guardian. Books with marginalia revealed his thinking, tools worn smooth by constant use. In the storage room, she found diving equipment that told its own story, wetsuits from different eras showing the progression of technology, dozens of metal detector batteries all dead, underwater cameras in waterproof cases, bags of pain and shells, each labeled with coordinates and dates spanning from 1987 to 2006. Her uncle had searched for nearly 20 years, then stopped. Why? In a wooden crate, Sarah found something that made her breath catch. A ship's timber, carefully preserved and mounted, with a brass plaque reading Winter's Curse, salvaged August 3rd, 1995. The wood was old-growth oak, dense and dark, with iron fittings still attached. Tool marks scored its surface, the kind made by hand tools, not machines. This was real. 18th century real. Her uncle had found something. Sarah carried the timber to the main cabin and set it on the desk, studying it in the lamplight. The wood felt solid under her fingers, heavy with age and salt. If this was genuine, if it really came from the 1740s, then everything her uncle claimed might be true. She opened his logbook again, flipping through entries that documented his obsession. The early pages were filled with research notes, coordinates, dive plans. The middle section detailed finds, timbers, nails, pottery fragments, all cataloged with scientific precision. But the later entries changed tone, becoming more cryptic, more personal. March 12, 2006. Found the bell today. 300 feet down, buried in sand. Brass still bright. Inscription confirmed. Winter's Curse, commission 1738. They said I was crazy. They were wrong. Sarah's hands trembled. The ship's bell, that was proof, definitive proof. April 2nd, 2006. Brought the bell up, showed no one. Can't trust anyone with this. The wreck site is unstable, dangerous, but the cargo hold is there. I've seen it. Everything they said was legend is real. She flipped faster, scanning entries. June 19, 2006, last dive. Too old for this now, heart isn't what it was. But I've marked the site. When the time is right, when I'm certain it's safe, I'll bring everything up. Until then, the cabin keeps the secret. There was that word again, cabin. Sarah stood and walked through the ship house slowly, looking at it with new eyes. The structure was built from a ship's hull. Ships had multiple cabins, captain's cabin, crew cabins, passenger cabins. Her uncle had preserved the captain's cabin as his study. Emma slept in what had been the forward cabin. But ships this size had another important space, the stern cabin, the most private, most secure room on any vessel, where the captain kept valuables and charts, where the ship's papers and money would be locked away. Sarah moved to the back wall of the captain's study, the wall that should have led to the stern cabin, but instead was solid planking. She ran her hands along it, feeling for seams, for anything unusual. The wood was smooth, carefully fitted, too carefully. She grabbed a flashlight and examined the wall inch by inch. There, near the floor, hidden in the shadow of the desk, a keyhole. Not modern. Old brass, the kind that needed a skeleton key. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She searched the desk drawers, finding only papers and navigation tools. Searched the storage room, the kitchen cabinets, the bedroom. No key. Think. Where would he hide a key? She returned to the captain's cabin and stood very still, looking at everything. The sextant on the desk, the compass, the parallel rulers, the mounted ship's timber, the bookshelf filled with maritime histories. Books, people always hid things in books. She started pulling volumes off the shelf, shaking them, checking for hollow spaces. 10 books, 20, 30, nothing. She was reaching for the 41st when Emma appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. Mama, I heard noises. Are there ghosts? No ghost, baby. Just me looking for something. What are you looking for? A key? An old one? Brass? Probably small. Emma considered this seriously, Admiral whiskers dangling from one hand. What kind of key? For that lock. Sarah pointed to the keyhole near the floor. Emma patted over in her two big pajamas and studied the lock. Admiral Whiskers says old treasures are always hidden in plain sight. That's how pirates worked. They put important things where everyone could see, but nobody would look. Sarah smiled despite her frustration. Admiral Whiskers is very wise. He says you should check the compass. It was random, the imagination of a 5-year-old. But Sarah had nothing else. She picked up the brass compass from the desk. It was heavy, substantial. The kind used for navigation. She turned it over. The base unscrewed. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, was a key. Sarah stared at it, then at her daughter. How did you know? Emma shrugged. I didn't. Admiral Whiskers did. The key was exactly what Sarah expected. So, expected. Old brass, long shaft, the kind that would fit a ship's lock. She carried it to the hidden keyhole with Emma following close behind. Should we open it? Emma's whisper was barely audible over the wind outside and the ever-present sound of waves. I think we have to. The key slid in smoothly, as if the lock had been waiting. Sarah turned it. Something clicked deep in the wall, the sound of ancient mechanisms engaging. Then, with a groan that sounded like the ship itself sighing, a section of wall swung inward. Cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of old wood and something else. Mineral, like stone, like earth. Sarah shone her flashlight into the darkness beyond. A narrow passage led deeper into the stern. Stairs descended into what should have been solid ground, but clearly wasn't. The steps were ship's timber, carefully maintained, leading down into shadows. Mama, Emma's voice was small. Is that the secret place? Sarah's throat was tight. I think so. Can we go down? Every instinct screamed to wait for daylight and to be cautious, to think this through. But curiosity burned hotter than caution. Her uncle had hidden this, had kept it secret for decades. Whatever was down there had consumed his life. She needed to know. Stay close to me. They descended together, one step at a time. The passage was narrow, carved through what Sarah realized was solid rock. Her uncle must have excavated this over years, hollowing out space beneath the ship house. The walls were rough stone, but the steps were smooth, worn by countless trips up and down. At the bottom, maybe 20 feet below the main floor, the passage opened into a chamber. Sarah swept the flashlight across the space and her breath stopped. It was a cabin, a ship's cabin, perfectly preserved, as if it had been lifted whole from the ocean floor and placed here. The walls were original ship planking, curved to match a hull. A berth was built into one wall. A small table sat bolted to the floor. A sea chest occupied one corner. But it was what sat on the table that made Sarah's knees weak. A ship's bell, brass, tarnished green with age, but still magnificent. And on its side, clearly visible in the flashlight beam, an inscription. Winter's Curse, 1738. Holy hell, Sarah whispered. That's a bad word, Emma said automatically. But her eyes were wide as saucers, reflecting the flashlight's glow, staring at proof that legends could be real. The bell was just the beginning. Sarah moved deeper into the chamber, Emma's hand tight in hers, and the flashlight revealed more with each step. Ship's fittings lined the walls, iron brackets that had once held rigging, brass hinges from long-rotted doors. Navigation instruments sat on a shelf carved into the rock, a sextant missing its mirrors, a compass frozen at some ancient bearing, dividers stiff with corrosion. Pewter plates and mugs stood stacked on the table beside the bell, their surfaces dulled but intact. A captain's coat hung on a wooden peg, the wool still holding its shape after centuries underwater and decades in this hidden space. Sarah touched it gently, half expecting it to crumble, but the fabric held. Salt had preserved what time should have destroyed, and everywhere, covering every surface, tucked into every corner, documentation, photographs with handwritten measurements in the margins, chemical analysis reports from laboratories she'd never heard of, letters from maritime experts on university letterhead, their assessments cautious but unmistakable. Her uncle had found the Winter's Curse, had salvaged these artifacts piece by piece, had proven everything, authenticated everything, documented everything, and hidden it all down here, 20 feet beneath a rotting ship house, in a chamber he'd carved from solid rock over years of secret labor. Why? Sarah's hands trembled as she examined the sea chest. The wood was tropical hardwood, dense enough to survive submersion, bound with iron straps that had fused with rust into something stronger than their original design. She pried at the lid. It resisted, then gave with a groan that echoed off stone walls. Inside were papers wrapped in modern waterproof containers. Her uncle's doing. She extracted one carefully, unrolled it on the table beside the bell. A ship's manifest, dated September 12, 1743. The handwriting was elegant, each letter formed with the precision of someone who'd learned penmanship as an art. Cargo, whale oil, 40 barrels. Timber, oak, P9, 200 board feet. Furs, beaver, fox, 80 pelts. Standard colonial trade goods. But at the bottom, in different ink and a different hand, an addition. Special cargo, captain's keeping, gold plate and coin, Spanish acquisition. Weight, 237 pounds. Sarah's mind raced through calculations. 237 pounds of gold. In 1743, that would have been worth a king's ransom. Today, with gold trading around $2,000 per ounce, she did the math twice to be sure, nearly $8 million in raw metal value alone. But coins from that era, properly authenticated, carried historical premiums that could multiply that figure by 5 or 10. We're talking about tens of millions. She kept searching the chest. More documents emerged, letters between the ship's captain and colonial officials in Boston, discussing privateer shares and crown percentages, bills of sale for captured vessels, records of raids against Spanish shipping in Caribbean waters. Then, in a separate container sealed with extra care, a journal. Leather-bound, water-stained but intact, the pages still supple from whatever treatment had preserved them. The first page bore an inscription in that same elegant hand, Captain's Log, Winter's Curse, March 1740 to October 1743. Sarah flipped through carefully, catching fragments. Spanish vessel taken off Havana, cargo secured, share to the Crown documented, share to crew distributed, remainder to Boston for safekeeping. Standard privateer operations, all legal under letters of marque issued by colonial governors. But as she read deeper, the entries changed. The tone shifted from official record to something more personal, more secretive. She found the final entry, dated October 1st, 1743. The handwriting was hurried, unsteady. Storm rising, wind from northeast. We're taking heavy water. If God wills, we'll make Portland Harbor. If not, I've marked this chart with our position. What we carry goes down with us, but I'll not have it lost forever. Special cargo sealed in stern hold. Beneath captain's cabin, marked with winter seal. Let only the worthy find it. Beneath captain's cabin, marked with winter seal. Sarah's flashlight swept the chamber floor. This was the captain's cabin. Her uncle had reconstructed it perfectly, placing it in this hidden chamber as a shrine to his discovery. The planking underfoot was original ship's timber, fitted tight, but in the center, almost invisible unless you knew to look. A pattern emerged in the wood grain. Not natural, carved deliberately. A snowflake. Intricate, six-pointed, each arm branching into smaller, crystalline structures. But within the snowflake design, barely visible, the lines of a compass rose, 8 points intersecting the 6, the winter seal. It was about 3 feet in diameter, perfectly circular, the carving so shallow it could pass for natural wood patterns in dim light. Sarah knelt, traced the lines with her fingers. It's a puzzle, Mama. Emma was right. Everything about this was a puzzle. Layers of security, tests of knowledge, barriers that required understanding rather than just force. She tried pressing the center. Nothing. Tried turning the snowflake pattern. It didn't budge. Tried pressing different points in sequence. Still nothing. Maybe both directions at once? Emma's suggestion was tentative, uncertain. It was absurd. But Sarah had left absurd behind the moment she found a ship house on a main cliff. She placed both hands on the winter seal, one on a snowflake point, one on the compass center, and turned them in opposite directions. Click. The entire circular section of floor dropped an inch, then began rotating slowly, grinding stone against stone with a sound like millstones. Sarah jerked Emma back as the panel spiraled open, revealing stairs descending into deeper darkness. A smell rose from below, earth and brine and something metallic that made the air taste of copper. Mama, should we go down there? Everything in Sarah's body screamed warnings. This was dangerous. This was madness. They should stop, get help, call someone. But who? Frank Morrison, a harbor master she'd known for one day? The sheriff, who'd take one look at a homeless woman claiming to have found treasure and assume she was delusional? Marcus Kane, who'd been trying to buy this land for 3 decades and would use any excuse to take it from her? Her uncle had spent 40 years protecting whatever was below. If he'd wanted authorities involved, he would have called them himself. He'd left this for family. For her. We go down, but carefully. These stairs were different, carved from bedrock rather than built from timber. Cruder, older. Sarah counted as they descended, 10 steps, 20, 30, 42 total. They were below sea level now, deep into the rocky peninsula the ship house crowned. The air grew colder with each step, their breath visible in the flashlight beam. At the bottom, the passage opened into a chamber that stole Sarah's remaining breath. A natural cave, massive and cathedral-like, partially flooded with seawater that lapped against stone platforms. And in the center, resting on a platform that kept it above the waterline, was a section of ship's hull. The stern hold, 15 feet long, black with age and marine growth. The final resting place of the winter's curse's most valuable cargo. Iron fittings jutted from ancient timbers. The hull section showed compartments built into its structure, each sealed with corroded hasps that had somehow survived centuries of submersion and salt. Sarah approached slowly. Emma pressed against her side and examined the nearest compartment. The hasp crumbled when she touched it. The door swung open on hinges that screamed in protest. Inside were boxes, small wooden boxes, maybe 20 of them, stacked with care. Each was roughly the size of a shoebox, made from dense tropical wood that had outlasted the hull that carried it. Sarah lifted one out. It was heavier than it should be, the weight concentrated and solid. She set it on the stone platform and pried at the lid. Gold coins spilled across the rock, gleaming in the flashlight beam as if they'd been minted yesterday instead of nearly 3 centuries ago. Spanish doubloons, each stamped with crosses and crowns and the heraldic imagery of colonial empire. Dozens of them in just this one box. "Mama, is that real treasure?" Sarah couldn't speak. She opened another box. More coins, these with different markings, French designs, Dutch inscriptions. Another box held gold plate, dishes and cups and serving pieces, tarnished but unmistakable. A fourth contained jewelry, rings and necklaces and brooches set with stones that caught the light and threw it back in colors Sarah had no names for. There were 20 boxes in just this first compartment, and the hull section had 12 visible compartments, each with its own corroded hasp. She couldn't calculate the value, couldn't even begin to estimate. Millions, tens of millions, maybe more. Her uncle had found all of this, had salvaged it, had documented it, had hidden it here in this flooded cave beneath his impossible house, and had told no one, used none of it, died alone protecting it. Why hide this? Why live in poverty when you had millions beneath your feet? But even as she asked, understanding came. The moment word got out, everything would change. Governments would claim jurisdiction. Museums would fight over artifacts. Treasure hunters would descend with equipment and lawyers and violence. The peaceful isolation would shatter. And worse, far worse, the collection would be scattered, sold piecemeal, its historical context destroyed for profit. Her uncle had chosen to protect it intact, to preserve it whole, to wait for someone who would understand that some things mattered more than money. He'd chosen her. Sarah sat on the cold stone, Emma curled against her, surrounded by wealth beyond imagination, and cried. Not from joy, from the weight of it, from understanding that her desperate search for shelter had led to a responsibility she'd never asked for and couldn't escape. Because now she knew. And knowing meant choosing. Take the money and run, or protect what her uncle had died protecting. "Mama, why are you crying?" Emma's small hands wiped at Sarah's tears. "I'm overwhelmed, baby." Because of the treasure? Because of everything. Emma was quiet for a moment, then spoke with the simple wisdom children sometimes possess. "Uncle James must have trusted you a lot. He didn't even know me, but he knew you were family. And family means you'll protect what matters." Sarah gathered her daughter close. "We should go back up. It's late." But as she stood, the flashlight beam caught something else. Behind the platform, hidden in shadow, another compartment. Smaller than the others, partially concealed behind a timber that looked structural but might not be. Sarah squeezed past the hull section, careful not to disturb anything, and examined the hidden space. Another hasp, this one still holding. She used a rock to break it. The metal crumbled after just a few strikes. Inside was a single item wrapped in oiled cloth. She unwrapped it carefully. A painting, small, maybe 12 inches by 16, done on wood panel rather than canvas. The colors had survived remarkably well, protected by the wrapping and the seal compartment. It showed a young woman in colonial dress, her expression serene, a small smile playing at her lips. In the corner, an inscription, Elizabeth Frost, beloved wife, 1739. Captain Frost's wife. Not treasure in the monetary sense. Something personal. Something he'd carried into danger, hidden with his most precious possessions, kept close even as his ship went down. Sarah rewrapped the portrait carefully and placed it back exactly where she'd found it. Some intimacies deserve privacy, even across 3 centuries. They climbed back up, sealed the floor panel, returned through the captain's cabin, locked the hidden door. In the main house, dawn was breaking through the windows, painting everything gray and pink. Sarah had been underground for hours without realizing it. She tucked Emma into the hammock in the forward cabin, kissed her forehead, and returned to the captain's desk. Her uncle's journal still lay open where she'd left it. She turned to the final pages looking for answers. To whoever finds this, the world thinks I was crazy. Maybe I was. But I found what they said didn't exist. I proved what they said was impossible. And I hid it because some things are worth more than money. They're worth protecting, worth keeping safe until the right moment comes. I hope you understand. I hope you're strong enough. Because they'll come for it when they know, and you'll have to decide what to do. Trust yourself. Trust the ship. It's kept secrets for 300 years. It can keep them a while longer. Sarah closed the journal and stared out at the lightning ocean. Her uncle had spent 40 years protecting this secret. Now it was hers, but for how long could she keep it hidden? And what would happen when the world found out? She didn't sleep. Dawn became morning, became afternoon, and Sarah sat at the captain's desk with her uncle's journal open before her, a cup of bitter instant coffee growing cold at her elbow, working through pages of entries by weak winter light. The storm hit without warning. One moment the ocean was merely restless. The next it was a living thing trying to tear the world apart. Wind screamed against the hull with a sound like tearing metal. Snow came horizontal, so thick Sarah couldn't see the beach 20 yards away. The ship house groaned, not the settling sounds she'd grown used to, but deeper protests, structural complaints that spoke of wood and stone being pushed past their limits. Emma appeared in the doorway, Admiral whiskers clutched tight. "Mama, I'm scared." "Me too, baby." They huddled in the main cabin as the storm intensified. The wood stove couldn't keep up with cold air pouring through gaps in the hull. Ice formed on the inside of windows. The whole structure shuddered with each gust, and through it all came the sound of waves crashing against rocks, louder and more violent than Sarah had yet heard. Something cracked overhead, a sound like a rifle shot. A section of ceiling sagged. Water began dripping through, cold and salt bitter. "We need to get lower, away from the hull." Sarah grabbed their sleeping bags and led Emma to the hidden cabin. They descended into the chamber she'd discovered just hours before, sealing the door above them. Down here, the storm was muffled, the stone walls dampening the wind's fury. But they could still feel it, vibrations traveling through the rock. The ship house's death throes transmitted through the peninsula itself. They waited. Emma dozed fitfully. Sarah held her daughter and listened to the storm try to destroy everything her uncle had built. When silence finally came, it was absolute. Sarah climbed back up cautiously. The main cabin had survived, but barely. A window had blown out entirely. Part of the stern section above the hidden cabin had sagged dangerously. Ice coated every surface. The generator was silent, dead or drowned. She ventured outside. The damage was worse than she'd feared. Part of the hull had split along old seams. The porch had collapsed. One entire section of the additions her uncle had built was simply gone, torn away by wind or crushed by falling timber. And worse, when she tried to access the chamber with the real treasure, water blocked the stairs. The flooding had reached the spiral stone steps, rising to fill the cave system below. They could have lost everything in the flooding, probably had lost some of it. The wooden boxes weren't waterproof. Coins might survive, but documents would be destroyed. The historical context her uncle had worked so hard to preserve, gone. Sarah stood in the ruins and wanted to scream. Instead, she went to check on Emma, found her daughter already awake, looking at the damage with solemn eyes. The ship tried really hard, Mama, but the storm was too strong. Yeah, baby. It was. Frank Morrison arrived an hour later on a snowmobile, bringing firewood and food and news from town. Saw the damage from the harbor. Came to make sure you were alive. Sarah broke down then, the exhaustion and fear and overwhelming responsibility finally cracking her careful control. She told him everything. The hidden cabin, the artifacts, the treasure chamber below, now flooded, the fortune her uncle had found and hidden and left for her to protect or lose. Frank listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. James told me 3 years ago he'd found the main cargo. Said he was waiting for the right person to pass it to. Needed someone who'd protect it, not exploit it. Why didn't he just sell it? Sarah's voice was ragged. He lived in poverty. Because the moment word got out, vultures would descend, government would claim it, museums would fight over it, treasure hunters would steal it. His face was grim. James chose to protect it intact until someone he trusted could handle it properly. He paused, measuring his next words. He chose you because your mother told him years ago, Sarah has integrity. She'll do the right thing even when it costs her. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this. Frank's expression softened. You need help, real help. I know people, Dr. Rebecca Hayes at the Historical Society, security experts, maritime lawyers. But first, we stabilize this structure. Storm season's just starting. Another blizzard could collapse it entirely. How long will that take? Months, maybe a year. You'll have to stay here, guard it. Can you do that? Sarah looked at the damaged ship house, at the ocean beyond, at Emma playing with Barnacle near the wood stove. They had nowhere else to go, no other options. Just this crumbling structure and the fortune hidden beneath it. Yes, I can do that. But that night, alone after Emma was asleep, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. Heard about your storm damage. My offer still stands, $50K for the property. You should take it before things get worse. M. Kane. She deleted the message but couldn't delete the unease it brought. Kane knew about the storm, was watching, waiting. The next morning brought another visitor, not Frank or Kane, but a woman in her mid-30s, driving a sensible sedan that looked out of place on the rough coastal road. She knocked politely, waited for Sarah to answer. Sarah Mitchell? I'm Dr. Rebecca Hayes, director of the Camden Historical Society. Frank Morrison called me. Sarah let her in, wary but curious. Rebecca looked around the ship house with professional interest, taking in the damaged hull, the maritime artifacts, the organized chaos of her uncle's research. Frank said you found something extraordinary. Sarah made coffee, real coffee this time, from the supplies Frank had brought, and told the story again. Rebecca listened with the same careful attention Frank had shown, but her reactions were different. When Sarah described the ship's bell with its inscription, Rebecca's eyes widened. When she mentioned the gold coins in the captain's journal, Rebecca actually gasped. Do you understand what you have? The question was gentle, almost awed. Money, a lot of it. No, I mean yes, obviously, but that's not what matters. You have the most complete privateer cargo ever recovered. Everything intact, documented, preserved in context. This isn't just valuable, it's irreplaceable historical evidence. Everyone keeps saying that, but I'm not a historian. I'm a mechanic who got lucky. Your uncle was a fisherman who became one of the most important maritime archaeologists in New England through sheer determination. Rebecca leaned forward. You don't have to be an expert. You just have to care enough to protect it until experts can document everything properly. And then what? Museums take it all? Not if we structure things right. There are legal frameworks, donation agreements, long-term loans, ownership retention. You could create a foundation, maintain control while ensuring public access and scholarly research. Your uncle dreamed of a proper museum here in Winter Harbor, celebrating Maine's maritime history. Sarah looked around the damaged ship house, trying to imagine it as a museum. The idea seemed impossible. But then again, 2 weeks ago, having any shelter at all had seemed impossible. How long would that take? Years, maybe a decade to do it right. But in the meantime, we can secure everything, get proper documentation, start building partnerships. Rebecca pulled a folder from her bag. I took the liberty of preparing some information. Museums that specialize in maritime history, lawyers who handle artifact law, security consultants, grants for historical preservation. You came prepared. I've been waiting 20 years for someone to finish what Theodore started. Her expression was earnest. I'm not going to let this opportunity slip away. But I need your permission, your trust. I can't do anything without you agreeing to work with me. Sarah thought about Marcus Kane's predatory smile, about Helen Crawford's phone call after their first meeting, about treasure hunters and media circuses and the isolation her uncle had maintained for 4 decades to keep this safe. She didn't want to be alone in this, didn't want to make decisions that affected history without guidance. Okay, let's figure this out together. They spent the next 3 hours planning. Rebecca would contact museum directors she trusted, feeling out partnerships. Frank would handle local legal issues and security. Sarah would document everything, photographs, measurements, careful cataloging of each artifact, before anything was moved or disturbed. What about Kane? Sarah asked. He's been trying to buy this land for 30 years. We ignore him, don't engage, don't confirm or deny anything. Let him wonder. Rebecca's expression turned serious. And if he escalates, we involve law enforcement. I know the sheriff, he's solid. After Rebecca left, Sarah checked on Emma, still sleeping peacefully, then returned to the captain's cabin. Her uncle's journal was still on the desk. She opened it to the final page and read his last words again. Trust yourself. Trust the ship. It's kept secrets for 300 years. It can keep them a while longer. She found a pen and added her own entry below his. Day 14 since arrival. Found everything, the full cargo, exactly as Captain Frost described. Met allies today. Frank, Rebecca. Starting to believe this can be done right. Starting to believe I can protect what you left for me. I won't let you down, Uncle James, I promise. Sarah, she closed the journal and looked out at the darkening ocean. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more questions, more decisions. But tonight, she had a plan. She had allies, and she had hope. The ship house creaked around her, settling into evening, and Sarah could almost believe it was speaking, approving, welcoming her into the long line of guardians who'd protected secrets the world wasn't ready to know. The authentication process began 4 days later when 3 experts arrived from Boston in a van loaded with equipment that looked more suited for a crime scene than a historical evaluation. Dr. Catherine Walsh led the team, a maritime archaeologist from Yale with silver hair pulled back tight and eyes that missed nothing. She'd spent 40 years studying colonial shipwrecks and had authenticated more finds than anyone else in New England. Sarah watched nervously as they unloaded cases of cameras, measuring tools, chemical testing equipment, and computers. Emma clung to her side, equally fascinated and frightened by the strangers invading their home. This is quite the structure. Dr. Walsh studied the ship house with professional appreciation. Your uncle was either brilliant or insane. Possibly both. That seems to be the consensus. Well, let's see if his claims hold up to scrutiny. Rebecca had arranged everything, ensuring the team signed confidentiality agreements before they even left Boston. Frank stood guard at the property entrance, turning away curious locals who'd heard rumors about official people visiting the Chen place. The whole town was buzzing with speculation. Sarah led the team down to the hidden cabin first, then to the flooded cave below. Walsh's expression remained professionally neutral as they descended the spiral stairs. But Sarah caught the slight tremor in her hands when the ship's bell came into view. My God. One of the younger researchers whispered it like a prayer. It's real. Dr. Walsh examined the bell for 20 minutes without speaking, using a magnifying glass to study every detail of the inscription. She took photographs from dozens of angles, measured every dimension, scraped microscopic samples from the brass for metallurgical analysis. Finally, she looked up at Sarah. This is authentic. 1730s manufacture, consistent with known colonial bell casting techniques. The inscription matches historical records of the Winter's Curses Commission. Her voice was steady, but her eyes held something like wonder. This is the real artifact. The team worked for 3 days straight, documenting everything Sarah and her uncle had found. They photographed each artifact from multiple angles, cataloged items by type, era, and condition, took material samples for carbon dating and chemical analysis, mapped the cave system in the hidden compartments with laser measuring tools. Dr. Walsh's professional composure cracked only once, when Sarah showed her the compartments with the winter seal mechanisms. The archaeologist actually laughed, a sound of pure delight. Captain Frost was paranoid and brilliant. She examined the release mechanism with reverence. This level of security suggests he knew exactly how valuable his cargo was and how many people would kill for it. He built a puzzle that would take years to solve without the proper knowledge. My uncle solved it. Your uncle was extraordinary. Dr. Walsh's expression turned solemn. These compartments, if we hadn't known to look for them, we could have studied this wreck for decades and never found them. The historical implications alone are staggering. By the end of the third day, Dr. Walsh sat Sarah down with a thick folder of preliminary findings. I'll need 6 months to complete full analysis and publish proper documentation. But I can tell you now, this is the most significant privateer find in American history. She flipped through pages covered in technical jargon and scientific notation. You have 117 authenticated artifacts from the Winter's Curse. The ship's bell alone is museum quality, conservatively worth $3 million. The captain's personal effects, his coat, navigation instruments, journals, are priceless for historical research. She paused, flipping to another section. The treasure cargo is more complicated. We've cataloged what we could access despite the flooding. 412 pounds of gold in various forms, coins, plate, jewelry. At current market prices, that's approximately $13.2 million in raw gold value. Sarah's hands shook as she held the folder. But the historical premium adds significantly. Some of these coins are extraordinarily rare. The jewelry includes pieces that can be traced to specific European noble families. Conservative estimate with premium, 50 to 75 million just in gold. Silver adds another 10 to 15 million. Gemstones we couldn't fully assess, 20 to 100 million depending on quality. The numbers were too large to mean anything. Sarah's mind couldn't process wealth on that scale. Total treasure value, $80 to $190 million. Dr. Walsh met Sarah's eyes. But we haven't accessed the deepest compartments yet. Storm flooding prevented it. There could be more. What happens now, that depends on what you want. Legally, this is your property. Your uncle held clear title to the land, conducted salvage operations over decades, documented everything meticulously. The federal government could try to claim abandoned shipwreck rights, but your uncle's continuous possession and your inheritance complicate that significantly. So I own it, you have leverage, but you'll face challenges. Treasure hunters will come, they already have. Media attention will be intense. Federal and state agencies will want involvement. Museums will compete for access. It will be overwhelming. Dr. Walsh's expression softened slightly. What would you do? Sarah asked. If this was yours? I'd create a foundation, donate the artifacts to a museum partnership while retaining ownership through the foundation. That gives you control, provides tax benefits, ensures proper preservation, and allows public access. Your uncle's dream of a maritime museum here in Winter Harbor could actually happen. How long would that take? 3 to 5 years to do it properly. Maybe longer, but it would be worth it. This could transform this town, create jobs, attract tourism, fund education, and it would honor your uncle's legacy. That evening, after the researchers had packed up and returned to Boston, Sarah sat with Emma on the beach, watching the sunset. Her daughter had been remarkably patient through 3 days of strangers measuring and photographing everything. Mama, are we rich now? I guess we are, baby. Does that mean we don't have to live in the car anymore? Sarah's throat tightened at the memory. No, sweetheart. We never have to live in the car again. Good. Emma drew circles in the sand with a stick. I like the pirate ship better. Me too. Can we stay here? Even when we're rich? That's the plan. Emma was quiet for a moment, then asked with the directness only children possess. Why did Uncle James hide the treasure for so long? It was a question Sarah had been asking herself. I think he was protecting it, waiting for the right time to share it with the world. Was he waiting for you? Sarah smiled despite the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. Maybe he was. The legal battle started 2 weeks later. The state of Maine filed a claim asserting ownership of all artifacts recovered from coastal waters. The federal government followed with their own claim under the Abandoned Shipwreck Act of 1987. A distant cousin Sarah had never heard of appeared with a lawyer claiming he should inherit half of everything. Rebecca connected Sarah with a law firm in Portland that specialized in maritime artifact cases. The lead attorney was a woman named Jennifer Blake, who had successfully defended salvage rights in 3 major cases. Your uncle was smart. Jennifer reviewed the documentation with professional efficiency. He never filed salvage claims with the state, which means they have no documentation of his finds. He conducted operations from private property he owned outright, and he maintained continuous possession for over 20 years. That's a strong position, but they're still challenging it? Of course. There's too much money involved for them not to try. Jennifer's smile was grim. But we can fight this. Your best argument is that your uncle was conducting historical research, not commercial salvage. He never sold anything, never profited. He preserved everything for educational purposes. That exempts you from many salvage laws. The hearings dragged on through December and into January. Sarah spent days in courtrooms listening to lawyers argue over 18th century maritime law and modern property rights. The state claimed the artifacts belonged to Maine's cultural heritage. The federal government insisted coastal shipwrecks fell under their jurisdiction. The cousin's lawyer argued inheritance law superseded everything. Through it all, Sarah refused to back down. This was her uncle's legacy, her daughter's future. She wouldn't let bureaucrats and opportunists steal it. The media discovered the story in mid-January. A reporter from the Portland Press-Herald somehow learned about the authentication and published a front-page article. Homeless mother inherits $275 million treasure. Within hours, Sarah's life exploded. News vans lined the rough road to Frost Point. Helicopters buzzed overhead trying to get footage of the ship house. Reporters shouted questions whenever Sarah left the property. Her phone rang constantly with interview requests, book deals, movie offers. Frank and Rebecca formed a protective barrier, screening calls and turning away media. The sheriff posted a deputy at the property entrance after someone tried to sneak onto the beach at night with metal detectors. Emma handled it better than Sarah expected. She waved at news cameras like they were friendly neighbors. When one persistent reporter asked what it was like to be a treasure girl, Emma responded with perfect seriousness. Admiral Whiskers says journalists should mind their own business. The clip went viral. For 3 days, Sarah's daughter was more famous than the treasure itself. But the attention took its toll. Sarah couldn't go to Crawford's trading post without being mobbed. Strangers showed up claiming to be long-lost relatives. One man insisted Captain Frost was his ancestor and demanded half the treasure. Another filed a lawsuit claiming he'd told Theodore about the shipwreck location in 1993 and deserved a finder's fee. The worst came on a Wednesday morning in late January. Sarah woke to find Marcus Kane on her porch with 2 men she didn't recognize, all dressed in expensive winter gear that looked out of place against the weathered ship house. "We need to talk, Miss Mitchell." Sarah stood in the doorway, blocking their view inside. "About what?" "About being reasonable." Kane's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're in over your head here. Legal battles, media circuses, treasure hunters. This is more than one woman can handle alone. I'm not alone." "No," Kane gestured to the property around them. "I see a damaged structure that barely survived one storm. I see a single mother trying to protect millions of dollars in treasure from people who'd kill for it. I see someone who needs help. And you're offering to help? I'm offering to buy this property for $1 million. 10 times my original offer. You take the money, go somewhere safe and warm. Let professionals handle the salvage and authentication. Everyone wins." Sarah's jaw tightened. "The treasure's already authenticated, and it's not for sale. $2 million then. Cash. Today." Kane's expression hardened. "Be smart about this, Sarah. You're desperate, you are vulnerable, and you're making enemies you can't afford. Take the money before something bad happens." The threat was barely veiled. "Get off my property. Think about your daughter. These men you're fighting, they don't play nice. Accidents happen to people who don't know when to compromise." Sarah's hand was already on her phone. Frank Morrison's number pulled up. "I'm calling the sheriff. Leave now or I'll have you arrested for trespassing and threatening." Kane held up his hands in mock surrender, just trying to help. But when things go wrong, and they will, Don't say I didn't warn you. He walked back to his truck slowly, deliberately, making sure Sarah understood he wasn't intimidated. The message was clear. He'd be back, and next time he might not ask permission. Sarah called Frank anyway, told him about the visit. Frank arrived 20 minutes later with Sheriff Dalton in tow. Kane's escalating. Frank's face was grim. That wasn't an offer, it was a threat. He's done this before to other property owners who wouldn't sell. Intimidation, legal harassment, accidents that can't be proven. What kind of accidents? 3 years ago, a lobsterman found a colonial-era chest washed up on shore. Kane heard about it, made an offer, was refused. 2 weeks later, the lobsterman's boat burned to the waterline. The chest disappeared. No proof Kane was involved, but the timing was suspicious. The sheriff nodded. We've suspected Kane has connections to black market antiquities dealers, but we've never been able to prove it. He operates in gray areas of the law. Now that he knows you have authenticated treasure worth hundreds of millions, he's not going to stop with polite offers. So what do? We increase security. The sheriff looked around the property. I'll station a deputy here full-time. Frank can install better locks, cameras, and you need to accelerate the legal process. Get ownership locked down before Kane can find another angle to attack. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in the hammock in the forward cabin. She'd given Emma the only real bed, a cot Frank had brought, and listened to the ship house creak around her. Every sound seemed threatening now. Every gust of wind could be someone trying to break in. She thought about Kane's words. Think about your daughter. Emma was 5 years old, innocent, trusting. She didn't deserve to be in the crossfire of a battle over gold and history and greed. For the first time since finding the treasure, Sarah wondered if her uncle had been right to hide it. Maybe some secrets were meant to stay buried. Maybe the cost of bringing them to light was too high. But then she remembered his final words in the journal. Trust yourself. Trust the ship. She'd come too far to give up now. The phone call came at 9 in the morning, 4 days after Kane's threat. Sarah was in the captain's cabin organizing documents when her cell buzzed with an unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Reporters had her number now, called at all hours looking for quotes or exclusive interviews. But something made her pick up. A man's voice. Younger than Marcus Kane's, smooth and confident. She's safe for now. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Where is she? She'd sent Emma to play on the beach 15 minutes ago, visible from the windows. She rushed to look. The beach was empty. Admiral Whiskers lay in the snow where her daughter had dropped him. Where is my daughter? Calm down, Mrs. Mitchell. We don't want to hurt her. We want what's ours. The voice belonged to someone who'd never been told no in his life. Your uncle stole from history. We're reclaiming it. Open the treasure chamber. Let us take our share. You get Emma back. Sarah's vision narrowed to a pinpoint. Her hands shook so violently she could barely hold the phone. Let me talk to her. Prove she's okay. A rustling sound, then Emma's voice, small and scared but trying to be brave. Mama. Admiral Whiskers fell in the snow. I couldn't pick him up. Sarah's heart shattered into pieces she'd never be able to reassemble. I know, baby. I'll get him. You're going to be fine, I promise. The man's voice returned. 2 hours. Open the chamber. Step aside. We take what we came for. Simple. How do I know you'll return her? You don't. But you don't have a choice. Don't call the police or she gets hurt. Clock's ticking. The line went dead. Sarah stood frozen for 3 seconds that felt like 3 years. Then she was moving, grabbing her phone, calling Frank Morrison with fingers that wouldn't cooperate. Kane has Emma. He wants the treasure. I'm opening the chamber. Frank's response was immediate and forceful. No, you give him the treasure. He'll kill you both. No witnesses. You know that. Then what do I do? Stall him. I'm calling in favors. We're coming. Sarah's mind raced through impossible scenarios. The chamber was still partially flooded from the storm. She couldn't open it quickly even if she wanted to, but she had to do something, had to buy time, had to keep Emma alive. She called the number back. I need more time. The chamber's flooded. I need to pump the water first. The voice was impatient now, edges of violence creeping in. You have 1 hour. Get it done. It's physically impossible. Then Emma stays cold a little longer. She's in a shed somewhere. No heat. Winter Harbor gets pretty cold this time of year. You dressed her warm enough this morning? Sarah wanted to scream, to beg, to promise him anything. Instead, she forced her voice steady. I'm starting the pump now. She actually tried. Hauled out the portable pump Frank had left, dragged it down to the flooded stairs, fired it up. But it was too slow. The chamber was massive. Water would take days to remove, not hours. 45 minutes passed. The water level had barely dropped 6 inches. Frank called. Help's coming. Rebecca contacted the FBI. Kidnapping's a federal crime. But they're 90 minutes out. Keep stalling. 15 minutes later, the phone rang again. Kane's associate, his voice harder now, done pretending to be civilized. Time's up. Open it now or I'm done being nice. I'm trying. I need... Put Emma on the phone, please. She heard her daughter crying before she spoke. Mama, I'm cold. It's dark. I want to come home. A different voice in the background, rough and impatient. Kid's shivering pretty bad, boss. Lips are turning blue. Last chance, Mitchell. Open the fucking chamber or we leave her in the cold. Sarah was about to cave, about to give them everything. Her uncle's life work, the historical treasure, the future she'd promised Emma, when she heard sirens in the distance. Multiple vehicles approaching fast. Frank had intercepted the kidnappers on the main road, brought Walter Reed and 3 other fishermen in trucks that blocked both directions. You're not going anywhere with that kid. Kane's man, Marcus Kane Jr., Sarah would learn later, made the mistake of pulling a gun. Get out of the way or someone gets hurt. But Sheriff Dalton had arrived from the other direction, and behind him came 2 unmarked sedans that could only be federal agents. FBI's here, Kane. It's over. Release the girl. The standoff lasted 6 minutes. Kane Jr. tried to negotiate, tried to bargain, but his associate Ross cracked under pressure from agents who'd handled actual criminals instead of desperate single mothers. Mile marker 7, blue shed behind the marina. The deputy found Emma locked in an unheated storage shed that reeked of fish and diesel fuel. She was hypothermic, lips blue, fingers white with early frostbite, but alive. They rushed her to Winter Harbor Medical Center, wrapped in heated blankets, while federal agents arrested Kane Jr., Kane Sr., and Helen Crawford for conspiracy. Sarah arrived at the hospital as doctors were treating Emma for mild hypothermia and frostbite. She collapsed holding her daughter, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe, while Emma patted her hair with bandaged hands. I wasn't scared, Mama. Admiral Whiskers told me you'd come. That night, after Emma was released with instructions to keep her warm and watch for infection, Rebecca came to the ship house with a proposal that made Sarah's stomach turn. For Emma's well-being, you need to consider sending her somewhere safe, temporarily. Sarah's immediate reaction was visceral refusal. She stays with me. Rebecca's expression was gentle but firm. Can you protect her? Kane's in jail, but he's not alone. There's a network. They know what you have now. What if they come back? The question hung in the cold air of the damaged ship house. Sarah looked at Emma sleeping in the cot, bandages on her hands, face still pale from her ordeal. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She checked on Emma every 15 minutes, terrified someone would take her again. Every sound outside was a threat. Every creak of wood was an intruder. By morning, she'd made the hardest decision of her life. Rebecca's sister, Ann Hayes, lived in Burlington, Vermont. Warm house, safe neighborhood, excellent schools. Emma could stay there while Sarah finished the legal battles and secured the treasure properly. Just temporarily. 3 to 6 months. When Sarah explained it the next day, Emma understood with a wisdom that broke her mother's heart. I'm being brave like you, Mama. They packed Emma's small bag together. Clothes, books, Admiral Whiskers. Sarah tried to memorize every detail of her daughter's face, knowing she'd missed months of her growing up. December 12th, Ann Hayes arrived to collect Emma, a warm, grandmotherly woman who immediately put Emma at ease with talk of hot chocolate and a neighbor's friendly dog. Sarah watched the car drive away until it disappeared into the trees, then sank to her knees in the snow and wept. This was the cost. This was what protecting her uncle's legacy required. Not just her privacy or her safety, but separation from the only person who mattered. Frank found her there an hour later, helped her inside. You did the right thing. Doesn't feel right. James made sacrifices too. For 40 years, You're carrying his burden now. His voice was gruff with emotion. But the difference is James chose isolation. You're not alone. Let us help. Sarah threw herself into work because it was the only thing that kept her from breaking completely. She documented everything that hadn't been destroyed in the partial flooding, photographing artifacts, measuring compartments, cataloging what remained accessible. Frank brought crews to shore up the damaged structure. They worked through December's bitter cold, racing against the next storm. It came on December 15th. The National Weather Service issued warnings that made Frank's weathered face go pale. Historic blizzard approaching. Category 5 nor'easter. Winds 70+ miles per hour. 4 to 6 feet of snow expected. Coastal flooding likely. Evacuate inland immediately. We need to leave. Frank was adamant. The structure won't survive this. Sarah looked at the treasure chamber, still partially flooded, most of its contents inaccessible. If the ship house collapses, we lose access forever. Then we pump it dry now. We have maybe 18 hours. Frank called in every favor he had. An industrial pump arrived from the marina. Walter and 2 other fishermen volunteered to help despite the approaching storm. They worked through the night, pumping water while the sky darkened with unnatural speed and the temperature plummeted to 10 below zero. By dawn, the water level had dropped enough to access the real treasure chamber. But the storm was visible offshore now. A massive wall of dark clouds lit by lightning, moving toward them with terrible purpose. We document it, photograph everything, then we get out. Sarah's voice allowed no argument. No time to remove anything. But we prove it exists. Sarah, Frank, and Walter descended together with cameras and measuring equipment. The chamber revealed itself fully for the first time since the previous storm. The stern section of the Winter's Curse sat on its stone platform like an altar to avarice and ambition. 24 compartments built into the hull. 12 visible, 12 hidden behind false backs with winter seal mechanisms. They opened everything, working with frantic speed. The first visible compartment held 60 boxes of coins, triple what Sarah had seen in the test cache. The second contained loose gemstones in quantities that seemed impossible. Rubies, emeralds, sapphires, diamonds, all uncut, all massive. The third held jewelry that belonged in museums. Elaborate pieces with aristocratic crests, rings sized for nobles, necklaces that had adorned Spanish nobility before being stripped away by privateers. The fourth compartment contained silver plate so pure it still gleamed despite centuries underwater. Serving pieces, chalices, dishes, all engraved with family coats of arms. The fifth held documents, Captain Frost's complete personal ledgers, correspondence with colonial officials, maps marked with raid locations. Then Walter forced open the first hidden compartment, the winter seal mechanism breaking under his crowbar. What they found made Sarah's calculations from weeks ago seem laughably conservative. More treasure, better treasure. This was where Frost had hidden his finest prizes. One box contained uncut diamonds of such size and clarity that Sarah could only stare. Another held gold bars. Frost had melted down some of his coins for easier storage, a level of planning that spoke to years of deliberate accumulation. A third hidden compartment revealed religious artifacts, crosses, chalices, decorative pieces that could only have come from churches. The implications were dark. This wasn't just privateering. This was theft layered on theft. How much is this worth? Walter's voice was hushed, reverent. Sarah did rapid calculations in her head, adding to her previous estimates. Initial estimate was 80 to 190 million. But there's twice as much as we thought. This could be 275 million, maybe more. Frank photographed frantically, his camera flash creating strange shadows in the underground chamber. Biggest find in American maritime history. Then the ship house above them groaned, not the settling sounds they'd grown accustomed to, but a deep structural scream of wood being torn apart. Water began pouring down the spiral stairs. Ceiling's compromised. Frank grabbed Sarah's arm. We leave now. Sarah snatched one box of documents, the camera with their precious photographs. They ran for the stairs as behind them came an enormous crack, the sound of stone splitting, timber collapsing. Part of the ceiling fell, crushing the platform's edge. Water surged in, flooding the chamber they'd just emptied. They reached the hidden cabin level as debris crashed down, kept climbing as the ship house shook like a living thing in its death throes, burst into the main cabin as windows exploded inward from wind pressure. Part of the hull was splitting along seams invisible until stress revealed them. The whole structure tilted, groaned, seemed to be tearing itself apart. Structure's failing, evacuate. Sarah grabbed her uncle's journals, the ship's bell from the hidden cabin. Walter carried their equipment. They ran to Frank's truck as the entire stern section, the part containing all the hidden chambers in treasure access, collapsed inward with a sound like the end of the world. From the safety of the road, engine running, heater blasting, they watched the ship house die. The stern caved in completely. The main hull split in half, bow section falling one direction, midship the other. 300 years of history, 20 years of her uncle's work, the structure that had sheltered her and Emma, destroyed. Sarah screamed, tried to get out of the truck, run back, save something. Frank and Walter held her physically as she fought them. The treasure, we lost access. Uncle James protected it for 40 years and I lost it in 2 months. Frank's voice was firm, commanding. We have photos. We have proof. That's enough. But Sarah knew the truth. They'd lost access to the main chamber. Storm flooding and structural collapse had buried it under tons of debris. Professional excavation would cost millions, take months, might not recover everything. 15, maybe 20% of the treasure was gone. Crushed, swept away, damaged beyond recovery. Everything her uncle had built, destroyed on her watch. That night, they sheltered in Winter Harbor's emergency warming center. Sarah sat in shock, staring at nothing, while Frank made calls and Walter tried to get her to eat something. The photos survived. The camera had auto-backed everything to cloud storage. Dr. Walsh reviewed the images remotely and confirmed them. This is authenticated, unquestionable. Federal authorities will have to acknowledge it. But media got the story within hours. Headlines screamed, $270 million treasure found in Maine, ship house destroyed in storm. Sarah's face was everywhere. News vans returned in force. Helicopters flew over the ruins. Her phone rang constantly. Interview requests worth 6 figures, book deals worth 7, movie rights worth more. Privacy gone forever. This was the cost her uncle had avoided for 4 decades. Within a week, legal challenges multiplied. The state filed claims to coastal shipwrecks and cultural heritage. The federal government cited the Abandoned Shipwreck Act. Marcus Kane Sr., even from jail, filed for finder's fees. And then Thomas Mitchell appeared, Sarah's father. She hadn't seen him in 15 years, not since he'd walked out when she was 17. Now he arrived in an expensive suit with a lawyer in tow, claiming as James's brother, he deserved 50%. The confrontation happened outside the ruins of the ship house, cameras rolling, the whole town watching. Sarah, honey, we should work together on this. His voice was conciliatory, practiced. Sarah's response was ice. You weren't there when Emma and I slept in our car. You're not family now. James was my brother. I have legal rights. Jennifer Blake, Sarah's lawyer, stepped between them. James's will specifically named Sarah as sole heir. Your brother deliberately excluded you. You have no claim. Thomas's expression hardened. We'll see what the court says. But the court saw through him. At the federal hearing in Portland on January 15th, Judge Margaret Chen heard arguments from all parties. The courtroom was packed. Media, treasure hunters, historians, locals who'd driven up to watch. The state attorney argued for cultural heritage. The federal attorney cited abandoned shipwreck statutes. Thomas's lawyer claimed family inheritance law. Then Judge Chen asked Sarah directly to explain her intentions. Sarah stood, nervous but determined. Your Honor, my uncle spent 40 years protecting this. He could have been rich. He chose preservation over profit. I want to honor that. Create a foundation, partner with museums, make this accessible to the public. She paused, meeting the judge's eyes. But I won't let it be taken by governments who ignored Uncle James for decades when he asked for help. He tried proper channels in 2007. He was buried in bureaucracy, jurisdictional fights, agencies that fought instead of helping. So he protected it alone for 20 more years. He trusted me. I won't betray that trust. The judge deliberated for 2 hours, then delivered her ruling. Mr. Mitchell spent 40 years researching, documenting, preserving. This was scholarship, not commercial salvage. He maintained continuous possession on private property. The artifacts belonged to his legal heir, Ms. Sarah Mitchell. She raised a hand to forestall the government attorney's objections. However, given the cultural significance, Ms. Mitchell must work with state and federal agencies on preservation and public access. But ownership remains with Ms. Mitchell. Thomas Mitchell stormed out. The government attorneys looked frustrated but didn't appeal. The precedent was too risky. Sarah nearly collapsed with relief. Outside the courthouse, Thomas waited, but his demeanor had changed, broken instead of aggressive. "Can we talk? Just you and me, no lawyers." Sarah almost refused, but something in his face stopped her. They walked to a coffee shop 2 blocks away, sat in a corner booth where no one would overhear. "I know I have no right to ask anything from you." Thomas stared at his untouched coffee. "I was a terrible father, abandoned you and your mother. When I heard about the treasure, I saw dollar signs. I'm not proud. What do you want?" "To apologize. And to explain. Not excuse, but explain. After your mother divorced me, I fell apart. Started drinking, lost jobs, lost self-respect. By the time I got sober, you were grown and wanted nothing to do with me. I didn't blame you." He looked up, eyes red. "When I heard about the inheritance, I thought it was my chance to make up for lost time. But that was selfish. You don't buy back family with lawsuits." Sarah studied the man who'd hurt her. "You left when I needed you most. I slept in my car with your granddaughter because I had nowhere else to go. You weren't there, I know. I'm so sorry." The silence stretched. Sarah felt the anger she'd carried for 15 years, felt it burn and ache, and finally, slowly begin to ease. "I forgive you, not because you deserve it, because I don't want to carry this anymore. But forgiveness doesn't mean relationship. You don't get to be grandpa now. Maybe someday if you prove you've changed, but not today." Thomas nodded, tears on his weathered cheeks. "That's more than fair. Thank you for hearing me out." He left, and Sarah sat alone with her coffee, feeling lighter than she had in years. By April, the legal framework was complete. The James Mitchell Maritime Heritage Foundation was established with Sarah as executive director. Her salary, $60,000 a year, modest for a museum director, microscopic compared to what she could have taken. "This isn't about me getting rich, it's about doing right." The board included Frank Morrison as VP, Dr. Rebecca Hayes as secretary, Dr. Catherine Walsh as chief curator, Walter Reed as local representative, and 2 curators from the Smithsonian and Peabody Essex museums. Partnership agreements were signed. Artifacts would rotate through major institutions on 5-year loans. Revenue would fund preservation, research, education, and community development. And eventually, 3 to 5 years out, a permanent maritime museum would be built in Winter Harbor. On May 1st, Emma came home after 6 months in Vermont. Sarah drove to Burlington to collect her, and when her daughter ran into her arms, Sarah wept for the 3rd time since this all began. "I missed you so much." Emma had grown, matured, gained confidence from her time away. And the ship house in Barnacle. "The ship house is different now, baby. Smaller. Just the forward section standing." Emma pulled back, studied her mother's face seriously. "That's okay. We're still together." They moved into the renovated forward hull section. More modest but comfortable. Security systems and privacy fences gave them space to breathe. Media attention had died down to manageable levels. Emma enrolled in Winter Harbor Elementary and made friends quickly, telling everyone about her mama who'd found treasure and saved history. Through spring and summer, Winter Harbor transformed. New restaurants opened to serve expected tourists. The marina expanded with 40 new slips. Property values rose 40%. Young families who'd left for opportunities elsewhere started returning. The school enrollment jumped for the first time in 20 years. Construction began on the Winter Harbor Maritime Museum that summer, with an opening planned for 18 months out. The design echoed colonial ship lines while incorporating modern climate control and security. Federal grants provided initial funding. Private donations poured in from wealthy collectors and maritime enthusiasts. Excavation of the collapsed treasure chamber began in July with a professional team and a $2.5 million budget. 4 months of careful work recovered 85% of the treasure intact. 15% was lost, crushed by falling debris, swept away by flooding, damaged beyond recovery. Sarah mourned what was lost, but celebrated what remained. $235 million in authenticated treasure and artifacts, more than enough to fund the foundation for generations. During the excavation, they found one more compartment her uncle had missed, hidden behind a false wall in the deepest section. Inside were Captain Frost's truly personal items: a portrait of his wife Elizabeth, letters to her he'd never sent, his wedding ring, a small book titled Prayers for Redemption, and one document that changed everything. A ledger page showing that in June 1742, Captain Frost had intercepted a slave ship named Margaret's Pride. Instead of allowing it to continue, he'd purchased 30 enslaved people for £50 each, given them freedom papers, and listed them as crew members. Part of the treasure had been used to buy freedom. Dr. Walsh brought this to Sarah in person, her expression conflicted. Historically, this is hugely significant. It complicates the narrative. Some will say the treasure is blood money, tainted. Others will say Frost was ahead of his time, using privateering profits to free slaves. Sarah didn't hesitate. We disclose everything, all of it. The good, the bad, the complicated. That's what real history is, not sanitized stories. Uncle James believed in truth. So do I. 18 months after the storm, on a brilliant June morning, the Winter Harbor Maritime Museum opened its doors. Thousands attended. The governor gave a speech about economic revitalization. Walsh cut the ribbon. Emma, now 7 years old, helped unveil the first exhibit, the Winner's Curse Bell in its climate-controlled case, brass glowing like captured sunlight. The main gallery told the complete story. Captain Frost's coat and navigation instruments, interactive displays explaining privateer culture, videos of Dr. Walsh discussing the archaeological significance, a timeline from 1738 to the present. The treasure room displayed selected pieces with careful context, not pirate loot, but historical evidence of colonial-era wealth, trade, and moral complexity. A special exhibit called the Redemption Ledger documented Frost's purchase and freeing of 30 enslaved people, acknowledging the complicated legacy. But Sarah's favorite was the James Mitchell Gallery, her uncle's story told through photographs spanning from young fisherman to elderly guardian. His journals open to key entries, his diving equipment worn smooth by decades of use, video interviews with Frank, Walter, locals who'd known him, and his final letter to Sarah displayed with her permission. The plaque read, Captain James Mitchell, 1941 to 2023, fisherman, researcher, guardian. He proved that dedication and integrity matter more than fame or fortune. He protected history when others would have exploited it. This museum exists because he believes some treasures belong to everyone. Sarah was asked to speak. She stood at the podium with Emma holding her hand and addressed 500 people. When I first came to Winter Harbor, I was homeless, desperate, out of options. I inherited what looked like a rotting ship house from an uncle I barely remembered. I thought I was just getting shelter. Instead, I got a mission. Her voice strengthened as she spoke. Uncle James spent 40 years protecting something he believed mattered. Not because it was valuable, though it was, but because it was true. He proved the Winner's Curse was real, that Captain Frost existed, that history sometimes hides in plain sight. But the real treasure wasn't the gold or artifacts. It was the lesson that dedication matters, that choosing to protect rather than exploit defines character, that some things are worth more than money. She paused, emotion threatening to overwhelm her. I lost privacy. I lost 15% of the treasure to a storm. I had to send my daughter away for 6 months to keep her safe. I faced people who wanted to steal this, who tried to intimidate me, who questioned my right to protect it. But I gained so much more. I gained a community that supports me. I gained purpose. I gained proof that ordinary people can protect extraordinary things if they care enough to try. The applause when she finished was genuine, sustained. Emma hugged her. Frank wiped his eyes. Even Thomas Mitchell in the back of the crowd applauded quietly. 5 years later, Sarah stood in the museum's memorial garden on a crisp October morning, watching a miracle. The frost tree had sprouted. 6 months earlier, Workers renovating the beach area had discovered another chamber under the bow section, one her uncle had never found. Inside was a small wooden box containing seeds preserved in wax for 282 years. Captain Frost's final message: apple seeds from Elizabeth's tree. Plant them somewhere new. Let something beautiful grow from this tragedy. The botanist said it was impossible. Seeds didn't survive 3 centuries. But they'd planted them anyway in the memorial garden dedicated to all those lost at sea: Frost's crew, the freed slaves from Margaret's Pride, Uncle James, all maritime victims. One seed had sprouted, a tiny apple tree sapling, its first leaves bright green against October's fading colors. Sarah touched the fragile trunk gently. Emma, now 12 and already taller than her mother remembered, stood beside her. Do you think Uncle James knows what we did? I think he does. And I think he's proud. Do you think Captain Frost knows his seeds grew? Maybe that's why they sprouted. Some things are meant to survive winter. They stood together in companionable silence, watching the museum Sarah had built from ruins and determination. The foundation she directed now managed $180 million after operational expenses. They'd funded 47 scholarships for Maine students studying marine biology, archaeology, and history, created 150 permanent jobs, educated over 100,000 visitors. The real treasure had always been the lesson that ordinary people could protect extraordinary things, that integrity outlasted gold, that love mattered more than money. Sarah had come to Winter Harbor with $67 in a broken car. She'd found shelter, purpose, family, and proof that sometimes the greatest treasures weren't the ones you sought, but the ones you stumbled into when you were lost and looking for something else entirely. As Emma headed back toward the museum, she volunteered their weekends, already planning to study maritime archaeology. Sarah remained in the garden with the frost tree. She whispered to the ocean, to her uncle wherever he was, to the ship that had kept secrets for 3 centuries. Thank you for trusting me, for teaching me that protecting what matters is the greatest treasure of all. The tiny tree swayed in the coastal breeze, its leaves catching light, surviving its first autumn, proof that beauty could grow from tragedy, that redemption was possible, that even after the longest winter, spring always came.